A week or so ago, I had a call from a reporter from the John Campbell Show on Radio New Zealand, and he wanted to ask me about what the Bible says about money. I thought that was an interesting question for a reporter to be asking me, and it turned out the story was in relation to another type of church where the pastors get paid a lot more than Anglican clergy do, that's for sure. So we had a conversation about passages like it's easier for the camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven, and how Jesus said very clearly you can't serve God and wealth at the same time. All of those passages that make us feel really uncomfortable, and we try and kind of explain them away. Today's gospel is another one of those, even though it's not about wealth per se, but it's a question about paying taxes, which is maybe an appropriate question for us this week when we've finally got a new government. Taxes have indeed been on our minds. And Jesus' question about taxes is about the politics of his world. It's about the paying of the taxes, it's about the land, and it's about who is in charge. Our gospel readings for the last few Sundays have been very politically charged as we've watched Jesus go head to head with the Pharisees in the temple. We've had 3 Sundays in a row of really hard-hitting parables laced with violence and with tension. But today the leaders think they've finally got him. They sidle up to him and say, "Teacher, we know you're sincere. And we know that you teach the way of God in accordance with truth. And we know that you show deference to no one. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" You've really got to kind of hear their smarmy tone as they kind of get alongside and try and trip Jesus up. Matthew notes that it's both the Pharisees and the Herodians, the people who followed King Herod, who ask the questions. Normally 2 groups of people who were poles apart and normally vying with each other for power, but they've joined together this time in their desire to see Jesus tripped up. And it might seem like an innocent enough question that they're asking. Everyone has to pay taxes, right? But of course, Israel was occupied by the Romans, and so the people were paying taxes to the armed occupier. So if Jesus said yes to the question, yes, it is lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, that would have meant that he was supporting the occupier, the oppressor of his people. But if he said no, we shouldn't pay taxes to the emperor, well then of course he'd be inviting sedition and revolution and certainly the wrath of the Roman soldiers. And then he unravels another layer of meaning. On the Roman coins, of course, was the head of the emperor, like the Queen is on our coins. But the Roman emperor was seen as a god and was worshipped, and on the coins it said, "This is the divine emperor." So the coins were not only a symbol of Roman power, but also religion. And most of the very strict Jews believed you shouldn't even handle those coins because you were kind of acceding to the fact that this emperor called himself a god and thought of himself as divine. And in fact, the Romans let the Jews have different coins in the temple for paying for things in the temple. So a simple question about taxes was also a question about the divinity of the emperor and what the people should do when confronted daily with the need to acknowledge the divinity of the emperor in order just to survive. So many people had just accommodated. The Herodians were the accommodating types. They just kind of lived and let live. But the Pharisees were much more hardline in their opposition. So which way was Jesus going to jump? Jesus says, "Bring me a coin. Whose image on it and whose title is on it?" And they say, "Well, it's the emperor's." And so Jesus says, "Well, if it's the emperor's, give to the emperor what is the emperor's." Okay. But then he carries on, and it's as if he has someone standing next to him and he says, "And this person here, whose image is on them? Whose image is this person created in?" "Well, God's," they reply. "Then give to God the things that are God's." And the people are stunned. Jesus has sidestepped the question of tax and turned it into a question of who are we created to be, in whose image are we created, and to whom do we owe allegiance? There is a parallel and similar passage to this gospel story in the Talmud, the Jewish rabbinical teaching collected over the centuries. And in the Talmud we can read, Adam, the first human being, was created as a single person to show forth the greatness of the ruler who is beyond all rulers, the Blessed Holy One. For if a human ruler mints many coins from one mould, they all carry the same image. The coins all look the same. But the Blessed Holy One shaped all human beings in the divine image, and yet not one of them resembles another. So humanity is created in the image of God, but not one of us resembles the other. So how vast then can our understanding of God be? As vast as the number of the people and cultures who walk the earth. And yet in all of that diversity, every single one of us are called to give to God the things that are God's. And Jesus is not at all half-hearted when he makes that declaration. He doesn't let the Herodians get away with just paying a few coins to Caesar and forgetting about the rest of it for the sake of peace and quiet. And he doesn't let the Pharisees use them for political reasons either. He demands that they both look at themselves and they think about how they are each made in the image of God. And he asks the question, to whom do they belong? To Caesar or to God? They can't split themselves and say, well, today I'm Caesar's out in the world, but tomorrow in the temple I'll belong to God. And of course, we end up getting challenged with the same question. To whom do we belong? We are marked with the sign of the cross at our baptism. That cross is marked on our foreheads every year on Ash Wednesday. We are marked as Christ's own forever. So is that just the Sunday part of us, or is it our whole selves? Is it our lives and our relationships and our jobs and our families and our money? And then what about politics in this week of a new government? How does giving our whole selves to God relate to us in politics? Well, Reza Aslan, in his book Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth, says that when the authorities ask Jesus the question, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, they are essentially asking him, are you a zealot? Are you a revolutionary who is opposed to Rome? And even though Jesus' answer is coded, Reza Aslan says he is answering a resounding yes, he is a revolutionary. And he's a revolutionary not just about the people, but about the land and the politics of the time. The people of Israel were drenched in the prophets who promised the return of their land. So when Jesus of Nazareth comes preaching hope and creating havoc, the ruling classes are also nervously asking him, are you another revolutionary zealot? And then Jesus answers, yes, he is, but it's kind of in a way that they don't quite grasp, so they're not really sure. Reza Aslan says, Jesus was crucified by Rome because his messianic aspirations threatened the occupation of Palestine, and his zealotry endangered the temple authorities. That singular fact should colour everything we read in the Gospels about Jesus. So as we move into a new political period with our new government, well, we won't be plotting to overthrow them just yet. We'll be paying our taxes as usual. We will all have different opinions, of course, about what our taxes should be used for, and we had our say about that last month in the election. And now we have to hold our government to account for those votes. But in this week of transition of our government, we can really give thanks that we have the privilege of living in a country where our transition in government is so perfectly peaceful and was in fact done with amazing good grace on all sides. So many countries don't have that right to vote, or if they do have the right to vote, their elections are accompanied with violence or hate-filled speech. We are fortunate indeed that that is not the case for us. But this question today about the temple taxes nonetheless leads us into political and religious spaces. In Jesus' time, the political and the religious were never divided. The question challenges us today: to whom do we belong? To what or to whom do we dedicate our lives? How do we bring our whole selves to discussions of politics, taxes, world issues, questions of faith? How do we bring our whole selves to our daily life, our daily routine of work and play? Whatever we do that as people of faith, living in the image of God who created us.